1984, the PKK waged an armed struggle against the Turkish state. According to Turkish sources, up to 2008, the conflict between Turkey and the PKK resulted in over 40,000 deaths, including PKK members, the Turkish military, and civilians.
Welcome to Tactical Talk. This is Zain Khan. Today, the topic of our show is the PKK. Is it an existential threat to Turkey? To discuss the topic, we have with us today Zain Kenar, a prominent Turkish journalist who writes in a Turkish newspaper and also appears on many Turkish channels. Welcome to our show, Zain Kenar. This is Zain Khan. It's a pleasure to have you on Tactical Talk.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Zain Kenar, let's get to the first question. The PKK, which was deemed as an organization by the name of Kurdistan Workers' Party, how did it evolve into a terrorist organization?
Well, I think it's safe to say that PKK was a terrorist organization since its foundation. When PKK was formed, it adopted political violence as a strategy, as a means to achieve some political gains. Curiously enough, the first victims of PKK's violence was actually Kurdish civilians, because when PKK first emerged in the beginning of the 1980s, it wanted to first consolidate its own power and leverage over the Kurdish population in Turkey. And it used violence and intimidation as a tactic to appeal to the Kurdish population in Turkey. In fact, let me give you an example. Last year, I interviewed a village guard in Turkey. Village guards are it's a militia which is funded by the Turkish state to fight along with the Turkish army against PKK. And village guards are composed of ethnically Kurds. And this guy, he's a Kurdish guy. He was fighting against PKK with the Turkish army. And I asked him, so why did you become a village guard? And he told me that in the early 80s, his village was targeted by PKK, and there was a massacre in his village which killed children and women. And after that massacre, he decided to join to the Turkish army and fight against PKK. And this guy was ethnically Kurd, and that village was a Kurdish village. So PKK, from the very, very early days of its foundation, could be, it was a terrorist organization, and it has been designated as a terrorist organization by the US, by European Union. However, of course, one might ask this question: so, if PKK is such a terrible organization, which adopts violence as the mere strategy to accomplish its political gains, so why do the Kurdish population in Turkey support PKK? I think this is a good and fair question, because nobody can deny that PKK has a base in Turkey. PKK is supported by a significant part of the Kurdish population in Turkey. And the answer of this question could be found in the wrongdoings of the Turkish state in the past. The Turkish state was based on state ideology, which used to be a very exclusionist, which was based on a strict interpretation of Turkish nationalist ideology. Accordingly, the Turkish state did not only deny the existence of Kurdish identity, it actually adopted a very, very harsh treatment against its Kurdish population. So in the past, the Turkish state did not acknowledge that there is an ethnicity called the Kurds. It did not recognize its ideology, and there were significant, the horrible human rights abuses against its Kurdish population. And PKK managed to appeal the Kurdish support because that kind of horrible, obscene obscene approach to an ethnic minority. However, the Turkish state has changed during the last 3 decades, yet PKK did not. Turkish state has changed its policy towards its Kurdish population. It first acknowledged, recognized the Kurdish identity, and especially during the last decade, there were serious reform attempts to grant Kurds the rights they deserve. Let me, for example, give you an example. The Turkish state did not, in the past, it did not recognize the Kurdish language, and it was banned. Kurdish language was banned in Turkey. But now there's a state channel in Turkey which broadcasts in Kurdish language. So this shows actually how the Turkish state's attitude towards that question has shifted. However, as the Turkish state has changed, as there were significant reforms on the Kurdish problem, on the Kurdish issue, PKK did not change. PKK actually keeps its militant Stalinist ideology intact. There's no kind of change in its political outlook, and PKK still adopts violence as the sole strategy to accomplish its political gains. While there's a pro-Kurdish party represented in the Turkish parliament right now, and it won 80 seats in the last election. So here we're talking about a major, political movement represented in the parliament. However, PKK is still insisting on using arms to promote Kurdish rights, while there's a room for politics right now in Turkey, which was absent when PKK was formed. When PKK was formed, the Turkish state did not allow Kurdish politicians, civilians, to promote Kurdish rights through peaceful methods, because the politicians were imprisoned, Kurdish parties were closed down, and PKK emerged as an alternative for many Kurds in Turkey. However, the situation has changed right now, and there's a room right now. There's a civilian room to promote Kurdish rights. Kurds are represented in the parliament, while PKK is still adopting arms as the sole strategy.
Ceren, you're making a valid point here. The PKK has waged terrorist attacks on Turkey since 1984. Can you tell us how many lives have been lost in these terrorist attacks?
The exact number is not known, but it is estimated that more than 30,000 people have lost their lives in this conflict. There are some who claim that it's even higher, that more than 35,000 people lost their lives. But I mean, this is of course a very, very high number of civilian and military loss on both sides. So Kurdish civilians, Turkish military security personnel were all victims of this violence. And it's not only lives, but also Turkish democracy and Kurdish politics. They are also a victim of PKK's violence. I mean, when there's a war going on, it's very hard to implement reforms, or it's very hard to make democratic steps in a country. Therefore, PKK's violence actually postponed the reforms on the Kurdish issue, and it really hindered Turkish democracy in that sense. And it also actually harmed Kurdish politics, Kurdish civilian politics, in the sense that it hijacked the voice of Kurdish civilians, Kurdish politicians who wanted to promote Kurdish rights through peaceful ways. So here we're talking about PKK's violence has cost many lives. It created a very severe humanitarian crisis in the southeast region of Turkey, and also hindered democratization in Turkey and hijacked Kurdish politics.
A very important question, and I know that you touched upon this in your previous answer, but the PKK claims that it represents all the Kurds. What's your opinion on that? Does the PKK represent all Kurds in Turkey?
Well, that's of course not the case. For example, if we're talking about the Turkish case, we see that AKP, for example, there's a significant Kurdish population who votes for AKP. AKP is the second most popular party. The ruling party, AKP, the ruling party, is the second most popular party in the Kurdish cities in Turkey. So first, in Turkey, not all Kurds vote for HDP, which is the affiliated organization of PKK. Not all Kurds support PKK, and I mentioned about the village guards, for example, ethnically Kurd militias who are fighting against PKK. So in Turkey, it's safe to say that the Kurds are divided about their approach and perception of PKK. But also, if we take a look at in the region, we would see that, for example, the Iraqi Kurds are very different than PKK. I mean, they share a very, very different political vision than PKK. We know that, for example, Barzani and the Kurdistan Democratic Party is the leading political party in Iraqi Kurdistan, and PKK has attacked Barzani and his party quite often. So it's not true that PKK is representing all Kurds, not in Turkey or in the region. However, when we look at international media, we often see, especially in Western media, we see, for example, when they're talking about PKK or PYD, they use the word Kurds, right? I mean, for example, when they're making a story about a clash between PKK and Turkish army, it's like the Turkish army versus Kurds. Or when, for example, PYD is doing an offensive in Syria, it's the Kurds who are. But I find this quite misleading because, of course, PKK and PYD, they are Kurds, but they are not the only sole representative of Kurds. This is a party which is supported by some Kurds, but there are also other Kurds in Turkey and in the region who completely disagree with their ideology and with their movement.
Okay, last question. Do you consider the PKK to be a bigger threat to Turkey than ISIS?
I think both PKK and ISIS pose grave danger for Turkey, and they are both threats. But here, we have to see the fact that the number of people who were killed because of PKK violence in Turkey is, of course, higher than those who were killed in ISIS attacks. And contrary to ISIS, PKK has a base in Turkey. ISIS is loathed by Turkish Islamists. You don't see much support for ISIS in Turkish population. However, PKK is still a popular party among the Turkish Kurdish population. So this is another actually thing that differentiates PKK and ISIS. And there's this third factor, which is the Turkish state in the past negotiated with PKK. The Turkish state cannot or could not negotiate with ISIS. Let me remind you the fact that 3-4 years ago, the Turkish government initiated a peace process and announced that it has been having direct talks with the imprisoned leader of PKK, Abdullah Öcalan, to disarm PKK. So in that sense, actually, the Turkish state, in a way, recognized PKK as a negotiating partner in a way. Of course, that peace process collapsed, and now the Turkish government says that that won't be repeated again. There will be no return to the peace talks. But that also actually kind of demonstrates that Turkish state's attitude toward PKK and ISIS is in that sense different. But I don't see much difference between groups who use violence as a political tool in a democracy. I mean, Turkey is a democracy. It's a flawed democracy, but still, it's a democracy. There is free and fair elections in Turkey. As I said, Kurds are represented in the parliament. If the parliament is the venue where the Kurdish rights can be promoted. And if there is an organization who is still insisting on using arms against civilians and military targets, this is terrorism. And in that sense, I don't see much difference in how PKK and ISIS actually operates. Both attack civilians, both use suicide bombers as a way to promote their cause. Both use child soldiers. Both share a fanatical worldview, a very extremist ideology. So in that sense, I don't see much difference between PKK and ISIS.
Thank you so much, Zain Kenar, for being on Tactical Talk. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
This was Zain Kenar, a prominent Turkish journalist, discussing the PKK and is it an existential threat to Turkey. Until the next episode of Tactical Talk, this is Zain Khan. Take care and goodbye.